On the phone, we have a gentleman who grew up in Minnesota, went and played college at South Dakota State, was a member of the Miami Dolphins and Minnesota Vikings, Pro Football Hall of Famer Jim Lang. Minnesota football in college was big time in the early 60s, winning a national championship. Did you want to play your college ball at Minnesota?
Well, I played high school football in a town of 500 people. And if you ran an out pattern in the end zone, you ran into the Platte River. And a lot of the end zones I played in were partial cornfields. And I don't think I ever, I know, I'm not, it wasn't a question. I don't think I was ever recruited. How I got to South Dakota State was my high school baseball coach had been a quarterback at South Dakota State, and I played baseball, football, and basketball. Those were the three sports we had, and I was a pretty good pitcher actually, and Dean Kessler at the time, that was my high school coach, said, Jim, why don't you come out to South Dakota State with me? We'll go visit the campus. He said, you can play two sports out there. We were Division II at that time. The North Central Conference with North Dakota State, North Dakota, and those schools, and so that's where I went to school. I really never heard from the Gophers.
Now, when you went there, you played middle linebacker?
Well, like a lot of high school, especially small town athletes, most of the athletes in a small town program probably play linebacker and fullback. Yeah. And so when I went out to South Dakota State, I actually ended up playing in the offensive line, and I did play some linebacker. I didn't carry the football at all, but I played offensive tackle. I played some offensive guard. I played a couple years at linebacker, and I actually went to Cleveland as a free agent because of my baseball playing. My baseball coach knew a scout from the Cleveland Browns, Bob Nussbaumer, and they signed me as a free agent to go to the Cleveland Browns in 1970.
So when you went to the Browns, did you think you had a good chance to make the team, or did you figure, let me try this, if not, I could go in, basically start a real job?
I was quite intimidated. I was quite sure that it was going to be one of those experiences you do. I had been a commissioned second lieutenant. I was supposed to report for active duty in October of 1970. And so I went for the summer just for the experience, I guess, and to see, in fact, I talked to a good friend of mine who's not with us anymore, Gil Gillingham, a great linebacker, a great guard for the Green Bay Packers at the time, was from Little Falls, a town near where I grew up. And I went to talk to Gail, and actually was hoping he would help me talk myself out of going. And he said, no, he said, there's going to be a strike this year. And he said, you aren't going to embarrass yourself. He said, go out there. He said, the veterans aren't going to come to camp. And he said, you'll get a good look, and if you can't play with the Browns, maybe somebody else will see it. He said, just take it a day at a time and do the best you can. And he said, what the hell you got to lose? And best advice I ever got. I went over there, and the Browns had drafted Mike Phipps, and Craig Wasinski from Michigan State was my roommate, and Bill Yancher from Purdue, a defensive tackle, and Kelly was there, and and these are all guys I've been watching on Saturday afternoon, after on TV. And it was a pretty humbling thing, and yet nobody knew who the hell I was, and I really didn't have to prove anything to anybody. So I just took it a day at a time, and went at it as hard as I could, and got down to the last preseason game, and Blanton Collier, I was still on the roster, and Blanton Collier called me in and said, Jimmy said, we think we can play. We think you can play. We're going to put you on our taxi squad. We're going to pay $500 a week, which is, I went to Cleveland with $50. And so I was pretty elated. I called my wife and told her what was going to happen, and He said, now you're going to put you on waivers tonight. He said, you got 24 hours. Any team can pick you up. But he says, I think we'll, this is what's going to happen. And next morning I get a call going to the office again, and the Dolphins had picked me off of waivers. And so I flew down to Miami. And quite honestly, I didn't even know Miami had a football team. And landed there, and we played the Atlanta Falcons that night. And, the rest worked out pretty well.
So you get to Miami. You get to training camp. Does Don Shula greet you, or how does all that play out?
No. I actually, they were staying out at Durrell at the country club, and that's where they stayed the night before the games. And I came in there. I got picked up at the airport. Went to my room. Wayne Moore. They had just picked him up from the 49ers, who became our great left tackle. Offensive tackle. He was my roommate the first night. We had no idea what the hell was going on. And, I just, again, you just take it a day at a time. You go where you're supposed to be, and you go out on the field. And at that time, I didn't know Don Shula from any other coach, really. I had never been exposed to any of that kind of thing. And, we were practicing 4 times a day. And this was the most intense man I'd ever seen. And we had 22 rookies on the team that year. And I was on the taxi squad for about 3 weeks, and then I got moved on to the roster, and started playing center. Monty Clark was my line coach, and Monty became, of course, a great friend. And he had played for the Browns, and he was the key that got me to Miami. And I didn't know this for quite a few years, but he had played for the Browns for 11 years and had just retired and became the coach with Don Shula. It was his first year offensive line coach. And he called up about 2 weeks before I got picked off of waivers and talked to a couple of his old buddies that were still playing for the Browns on the offensive line and said, you guys got anybody up there that you think can play? He said, I'm looking for a couple more linemen. And they told him that I was a possible prospect that had some upside. And that's how I got down there. So it turned out just like old Gail Gillingham said it would.
And then your second year, you're playing the Cowboys in the Super Bowl.
Yeah, it was quite a whirlwind. I remember the first game, my wife and she was going to drop me off at the stadium, and of course that's when the Orange Bowl was still there. And we stopped at a minor league baseball park. I thought that was the Orange Bowl. And it didn't look like there was a game going on. So and of course, there was no GPS or cell phones or anything at that time. So we stopped at a gas station and said, where the hell is the Orange Bowl? And it was quite a time. And Miami was one step from being out of the league. I mean, I talked to, as I got with the team for several years, and you start finding out the history of the team and how all this went together. I mean, that team was literally 1 year from being insolvent. And they make Joe Robbie, to his, foresight, they pick up Shula and they pick up Warfield, and they put this team together. And they started winning, and by the time I get there, it's the last preseason game. I mean, there's 80,010 in the Orange Bowl, and they're going nuts. And they hadn't lost a game yet in preseason. And it just all came together. It's one of those things. I don't know if you can duplicate that by some formula. I think Don is still obviously a dear friend, but it was one of the most incredible bunch of people that ever got put together. Whether it was just a stroke of genius or by accident or whatever the hell happened, it was. We're still very close. It was the damnedest group of players I'd ever been around in terms of how hard they worked and how they approached the game. And the coaches were incredibly dedicated people. And it became a very cohesive, well-oiled machine, obviously, and it accomplished a lot. And then the World Football League kind of broke our team up before we probably could have gone a couple more years. But that was the way things were back then. It's kind of an interesting period of time because my first contract I signed was $14,000. In the year we went undefeated, I started and played every play in that season, 17 games, and my salary that year was $26,000. And to win the Super Bowl was another 15. That was a big deal. Now these guys spend that much on dinner at night, I think, from what I've heard.
Yeah. Nowadays, it's like winning the Super Bowl is pocket change.
That's a pay cut.
Yeah, it's like what going to the Pro Bowl used to be when you could pick up a few $1,000s and all.
Yeah, the Pro Bowl, I went to 6 of them, and the winner share was $2,500, and the loser share was $1,500. And that was a big deal to win that damn thing because another $2,500 that was a lot of money to me.
But you weren't going to Hawaii back in those days.
Never did. The first year they went to Hawaii, I think was my 8th season, and I broke my leg off.
Now, it certainly didn't hurt Don Shula to come into a situation where he had a quarterback in Bob Greasy and the running backs in Larry Zonka, Mercury Morris. Yeah,
it was. But Greasy wasn't as great as Bob was, and he truly was. He wasn't a physical player like Luck or Peyton Manning or Tom Brady. If you looked at Bob in his playing days and saw him with his helmet on and the glasses underneath, you'd swear to Christ it was an accountant playing football. But he was a student of the game. He was an analyst on the field. He was, and of course the rules were different. We ran the ball on an average game. We'd run 70 to 75 plays, and 40 of them were running plays. And with Zonka, of course, and the offensive line was very methodical, very very well schooled. The performance of the traps and the plays that we ran were executed with a lot of precision and consistency, much like Green Bay had done. Green Bay was going to run the sweep, but you still couldn't stop the damn thing. And the Dolphins were just a very well-oiled machine. We didn't, it wasn't that fancy, but I think it was very effective because it was executed. The perfection of the execution was the goal.
Who did you block in that first Super Bowl? Were you against Bob Lilly?
Actually, the first Super Bowl when we played the Cowboys, I was on special teams. I didn't start until the next season. We played. My first game starting was in the first game I ever played in Arrowhead Stadium. Curly Culp and Buck Buchanan and Willie Lanier and those guys, and then that's the year we went on, of course, to beat the Redskins in that Super Bowl. And then the next year we came back and beat the Vikings.
There was baptism under fire with Buck Buchanan, Curly Culp, Bobby Bell, Willie Lanier.
Oh, God, they had, it was the first game played in that stadium, and I'll never forget it because it was 110 degrees on the field. It was the first game of the season. And, Buck Buchanan was a pretty imposing figure. I'm probably 6'2", and he's 6'8". And, I got to know a lot of those guys as I played. Curly Culp and I became good friends. And Curly Culp, this year, of course, I inducted into the Hall of Fame. And Mike Webster, who's no longer with us, and Mike Webster, the great center for the Steelers, and myself, and Jack Rudney, and from Kansas City, and a lot of guys. Curly Culp was the best goddamn nose guard that ever played the game. And, he was something. And he was an NCAA heavyweight wrestler. And there was a lot of great players. Joe Green, obviously, and all those guys. I remember the first time I lined up, and we were playing the Bears, and Dick Butkus was out there, and I'm looking up, and this is the guy I had I had watched as a kid and as a college player, and I'm sitting here saying I had a hard time believing I was looking at this guy. And I always had a white towel tucked in my pants in the back. Greasy had a fear of lining up behind a guard, and he was very attuned to looking down the field, looking at coverages and looking at secondary, and he wanted that towel. So when he'd break the huddle, he would automatically have a visual as to who the hell the center was. And as silly as that sounds, that was a very good thing to do. So, and Butkus pulled that damn towel out of my butt every time, every damn play. He'd pull that towel out and laugh. And he was a great player. There were some great players back then, and they played every play. They didn't come out on nickels and dimes and all that shit. I mean, you're looking at Dick Butkus the whole freaking game, you know. And Nitschke and all these great players. It was quite the time.
Did Monty Clark have a tough time? I mean, he's got you at center. You got Larry Little. You got Kuchenberg.
Well, Monty was next to Shula probably the most intense guy I've ever known, and Monty was a master at attention to detail and the psychological part of the game, and to visualize the game, and to play the game over and over in your head before you actually play the game. Psycho-cybernetics theory, and this whole offensive line had been cut. Cooch had played. He was drafted by the Eagles. He got cut. Played for the Chicago Owls, an amateur team. Came back to the Dolphins. Larry Little had been cut. Wayne Moore had been cut. All these guys had been cut, and they end up in this team. And Monty just kind of, took this philosophy of his, which was attention to detail and the finer points of the game, and make the right step and get the right position, get your head on the right point, and then plus with the effort and the execution, this became one line that could execute as well as any I've seen since. And it was a great bunch of guys, Norm Evans, and we started to play as a unit. We started to know each other as a unit. It became a really close bunch of guys, and that whole team, our offense. I mean, those guys are like brothers to you, and I mean, we paid our dues. It was a hard-working team. I mean, we put in a lot of time working on that field and working on execution, and I look back and see what it was quite a journey.
They talk about the no-name defense. They could have gave it the no-name offensive line, like you said.
Yeah, I think, but that was the concept of Shula's was if somebody got hurt, somebody came in and like when Greasy, the year we went undefeated, which is not talked about very much. I think it was the 5th game of the season. Bob broke his ankle, and Earl Morrow comes in. Well, Earl's 35 and ran the 40 at about 8 flat, and couldn't throw the ball maybe 40 yards. And this is 5 games into the season, and he takes us all the way to the AFC Championship game in Pittsburgh. By the way, we're undefeated, and we got to go on the road and play Pittsburgh at their place to win the AFC Championship, because that's the way the rules were then. And Earl takes us all that way, and we didn't think anything of it other than, well, Bob is hurt, Earl's our quarterback, and Earl, of course, had to respect everybody. I mean, he could run our offense, and everybody respected him, and everybody picked up the pace. The defense played harder, probably subconsciously. I mean, the offensive line knew that we've got an older guy behind us, not as mobile. We got to do better. And our running game, of course, was still there. And we go undefeated with our backup quarterback.
So
And
who missed the block on Deacon Jones that got Bob Greasy hurt?
I can't recall exactly how it was. I think it was a scramble play, and it's just one of those things. And
It wasn't the center's fault, though.
I don't recall that. No.
Now, the first time you saw Garo Yepremian trot out onto the field, what did you think?
Well, for the first few years, I didn't really think too much about it because I'm just worried about my job and worried about what I'm supposed to do. And this guy's a kicker. He talked funny, and but he could kick the ball pretty well. And I think the closest Garo came to death is when we played the Chiefs in the Super Bowl out in L.A. And of course we're dominating the game. We're not ahead by much. I think the game ended up 14-7. But he kicks the ball, kicks the field goal, and it's blocked, and he catches it and tries to throw a pass, and they ran it back for a touchdown. Which was at the time put them back in the game, and there's still some time left on the clock. It was a bit hairy, and even though we had pretty much had our way with the Redskins that day, they were back in the ball game. So it was. But Garo's a great guy. I mean, I always felt kickers were a important part of our team. They certainly didn't take the abuse that the frontline players took, but when it comes out on the field and the game's on the line, I mean, that they're carrying a lot of load on their shoulders. So I always felt Garo was a good teammate, and we were a very close bunch.
What did Shula tell him when he did that?
I can't tell you that. I learned a lot of new words from Coach Shula.
Well, that has to rank as the worst pass ever thrown in Super Bowl history, if not in the entire history of the NFL. I mean,
well, Don is an amazing man, and I'm sure there certainly has been and there will be great coaches in the future. All of these guys know how to get. It's an old cliche. They push players to the point that they didn't think they could go, and it's really it's a hard thing to describe. He worked as hard as we did. That coaching staff, I mean, they lived and slept that game just like we did. I during the football season, I never got away from football. And this today, the players, and I'm a family man. I've been married going on 45 years. I have 4 wonderful children. They're all doing well. And I remember, you didn't take off for birth of your son. I had 2 sons born while I was playing football. One son was born the night we played Oakland in a playoff game. And there was no thought of leaving, while my wife was in labor. And that might offend some people, but that didn't exist. The number one thing you did was take care of the team, and you take care of the team, they'll take care of your family. And I remember my Don coming into me before I was even active on the roster. I think it was my second year in training camp, and we were playing a scrimmage against the Saints. And he walked in before the game, called me in the little office. He said, "Jim," he says, "I'm going to tell you now." He said, "I just got a call and your father died." And he said, "After the scrimmage, we'll get you on a plane and we'll fly you back home." And I thought, nowadays, what do they take a week for a delivery? And, that just didn't happen back then.
And you played for another Hall of Fame coach in Bud Grant. How did he compare to Don Shula?
180 degrees difference. Both successful. Don was very much hands-on, in your face, dominated the meetings, in charge of the offensive meeting, game film. Bud sat in the back, ate granola bars, and Jerry Burns did the critiquing and did the film study, and Bud wasn't the most important thing. Bud would always say, he said there's more important things in football, and he was very philosophical about the game, and Don was more, we're going to win or I'll kill you.
Well, it's good to be exposed to both those perspectives. Otherwise, you think that just
when I got to Minnesota, and I had a good time here. The Vikings were great. To me, it's a great organization. It's just a different philosophy. I remember the first game, and I wasn't starting then. I was playing backup role, and we got beat. I forget who it was. We weren't a dominant team by any means in 80 and 81, and I was struck by the fact that after a loss, a team comes in and they shower and get cleaned up, ready to get back on the bus and fly back home or whatever. And, the boom boxes were on, the music was on, and I'm sitting there. I remember talking to Ron Yeri one day. He's a Hall of Fame tackle, great guy, good friend of mine. And I said, I can't believe this. He says, what's the matter? I said, yeah, we just lost a football game. I said, I didn't smile for 3 days after that. And it just eat the shit out of me, And I said, you guys, it's like it's no big deal. He said, well, it's just a game. And I said, well, I guess I'm from a culture that did look at it that way, And it was just a different way of looking at the same occupation. But it just wasn't something you carried with you outside the locker room in Minnesota. Whereas in Miami, I didn't shut that switch off till after the season.
I think the mentality's still there now. I mean, with the 72 team being undefeated, the last undefeated team, it's the same competitive fire there. You guys want that record.
Well, I always said somebody will break it. I thought the Bears, 85 Bears, I think it was, certainly was a team capable. I think certainly the Patriots came within an absolutely astonishing play of doing it. And I think someday it'll happen. But, of course, we may be playing more games. And I keep telling, people ask about that. Well, yeah, but they played 2 more games than you did. I said, yeah, but you got to remember, back in my day, we played 6 preseason games, and I think the first 4 or 5 years of my career, I played every game in the preseason, which would be 6 games, plus every game of the regular season, which was 14. So we didn't look at preseason games like they do today.
Did you lose a preseason game that year, or did you go undefeated in the preseason?
No, we were undefeated. I can't remember. I think we were undefeated that year, and I remember the first game we lost was the first preseason game the next year against the Vikings, and I remember Bud Grant taking a bow in the middle of the field. Everybody says, it's a preseason game, for Christ's sake. But, I know the first year I got down there, they were undefeated in preseason, and we may have been that year too. But preseason games are a big deal with Don Shula. There was none of this, well, we won't play the veterans for the first 2 weeks, and we sure as hell won't play them the last week. We played the first team played every game.
Nowadays,
pretty much, not necessarily 4 quarters, but when the backup quarterback would come in, I would usually play because we wanted to make sure the offensive line was intact to give that guy the best opportunity. And I might step out in preseason after my 4th or 5th year of starting. I might not play the 4th quarter, but I played 3 quarters for damn sure for 10 years.
Yeah. Nowadays, you just the preseason exists just to make some money and make sure the players are healthy entering the regular season.
Well, yeah, I think now we're getting to a mode where if you've got your conference tied up, your division tied up, and you've got 3 games to go, the question becomes, well, how much do we sit our starters before the playoffs start? And there was none of that stuff. You know, personally, I got a problem with that, and I guess it comes from the fan standpoint. You know, today especially, you're paying a lot of money, and I think the last probably crucial thing was when Peyton Manning was still with the Colts, and they decided not to play him and a few players that, you know, going into the end of the season, and it probably cost them a shot to go undefeated. And it's not a big deal, really. I think the teams have kind of come to the. It's not a goal of theirs. The goal is to win the Super Bowl, and
right.
And I think we didn't set out to go undefeated. And I remember Kuchenberg and I laying in a hotel in Waldorf Astoria. We were going to play the Giants. Last game I ever played, and maybe it was the Essex House. Anyway, we're going to play the Giants. Last game I ever played in Yankee Stadium. And we're sitting there, we're laying there at night, and Coach says, you know, I don't know I said, I don't know how to say this, but he said, I'm not so sure it's a good thing we win every game in regular season. I says, what are you talking about? He says, well, you know, it's an odds thing. He said, sooner or later it's gonna bite us. And we talked about that. But yet, once the game starts, you don't think about that. You know, you go out and you execute the game plan. You play as hard as you can, and you hope you win the game. You hope everything turns out in your defense, the offense, special teams, everybody comes together, and you end up winning the game. We had several games that year we could have lost quite easily. Yeah, Minnesota should have beat us. The Bills should have beat us. And there's a record nobody talks about, by the way. You guys could look this up. I think the Dolphins over the Bills for 20 games is still the longest winning streak against a team rivalry in the history of the NFL. I never lost to the Buffalo Bills. I still give Joe DeLamielleure a hard time about that. And they had a couple games. That's when O.J. was running wild, you know. And if they would have kept trying to build up his running yardage, yeah, they could have won the football game. But be as it may, I think we beat the Buffalo Bills 20 times in 10 years.
Not bad. What was it like? I assume you went up in practice against Bonacani.
Yeah, and I would like to say that the practice habits of the Dolphins were very hard. Guys worked hard. We didn't practice very long. I remember going out to the Pro Bowl. I had John Madden for 2 or 3 times, and John would always come up to me. Great guy. He'd say, Jimmy, he says, you guys execute better than any team I've ever seen. He says, how long do you practice? I'd say an hour and 45 minutes. He'd say, you're shitting me. I'd say, no. Now, you got to understand that's preceded by an hour and 45 minutes of meetings. But Don was very precise in practice. There was absolutely no standing around. An hour and 45 minutes, you never stop moving. And the plays he wanted to run were absolutely choreographed, scripted. And I said he knew exactly what he wanted to run. He knew exactly what he wanted to get accomplished. And if you didn't do it right, you still got done in an hour and 45 minutes. You just had another practice that day. And he could not get over that. And when I got up to Minnesota, we'd practice for 2 hours, 2.5 hours, 3 hours. And I would notice that when you get one of these marathon practices going, if the players don't know exactly how long they're going to be on the field, they save themselves. And I'd end up standing around here for 10 minutes and standing around here for 15 minutes. Our practices went boom, 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 boom. You went from this drill to this drill to this drill, team drill, individual, team passing, team defense, and practice was over. You run your gassers, and I think that was a very critical part of our organization.
When you went in the Hall of Fame, how did you feel?
Well, I think, I don't know if you can explain that. I totally was overwhelmed to be amongst those great players, and to be a part of that, to be considered part of that, is hard to describe. And it's just an overwhelming feeling. And they're tremendous people. I remember talking to Chuck Bednarik, and I always found the pre-70 guys, and of course now I'm an old guy. I remember talking to Chuck Bednarik, and I'm a big reader and a big history buff, and pretty familiar with a lot of World War II things. And Bednarik was a bomber pilot and tough old bugger, and you listen to those guys talk about their day, and they played for $3,500, and it leaves you in a sense of what you are actually a part of. And I'm not so sure today, in the high-tech, tweety world we live in, that we're not losing that. I think it's easy to lose that. And I think those guys are incredible, what they went through and what they played for with nothing, and get the crap beat out of them. And they formed the game. I still have CDs. I go back and watch Monday Night Football every once in a while. We played St. Louis with Conrad Dobler, and and those guys were playing, and it's like watching a home movie compared to today. The graphics were ridiculous, and no TV timeouts, and one camera angle, maybe two, no slow-mos. Pretty remarkable what has occurred now. It's just hard to see where this game has gone, and what a big production. I remember the first couple Super Bowls I played in, the halftime entertainment was a high school marching band. Now they, God knows what you see at halftime now.
Yeah. Speaking of technological advances, if medical technology back in the day when you got hurt existed that is in place today, you think you could have played longer?
It's possible. I still have bolts in my right leg. I had half a dozen or so operations on my knees. And I remember being in a huddle. A true story. I want to make one thing clear. I'm not on the bandwagon that the NFL sat in their NFL offices in New York and were sitting there conspiring. It was before email, so they'd have been taking notes and said, you know what, we ain't going to tell these stupid bastards that this game is dangerous. We're not going to tell them. And we'll hide it from them. That didn't happen. I think every team had their own way of dealing with medical situations. We had team physicians run around. You have a hip pointer so bad you couldn't squat down, and if you wanted to get a shot, you could get a shot. I remember we were playing the Steelers one night on Monday night. We got done with the play in the first quarter, and Coach couldn't get up, got in the huddle. He said, I think I broke my ankle. They get him off the field. And he came back in the second quarter and played the rest of the game. And he did. He had broke his ankle in like 6 places. 6 bones were broke. And but you know what? I could have said I can't go. That wasn't in the gene pool at that time. And we didn't think about, God, if I go out there and play, I might shorten my career. Didn't cross my mind ever. The true story, I broke my ankle. I think it was Mike Kadish fell out of my leg. We were playing the Packers. I was blocking back on a trap play inside. It might have been Mike McCoy. Anyway, he falls on my right leg. And I know something's broke. I go down. I hadn't been injured really other than torn cartilage and stuff for a few years. I'd always get surgery in the off season. And anyway, I know something's broke. So I get off the field. They go an X-ray. Yep, the top of my tibia was broke off. So I look at Virgin. We got 6 games to the playoffs. I said, well, what are we going to do so I can get out there and play? He said, well, I don't know. He says, I got an idea. He says, I'll meet you at the hospital tomorrow. We'll get down there. He says, I think I can screw that piece on back on there. I said, well, let's do it. So I go in for surgery to put 4 screws on the sheared off the top of the tibia where it rounds off. I sheared that piece off. So he screws that back on and casts it up. I wait 5 weeks and take the cast off, work out a little bit, go back out, practice for the week, and it wasn't going to work. And go back in the x-rays, the screws would come out. And they popped out about 1/8 of an inch under the skin. He says, well, you're done. We got 2 choices. One, he says, we can go back in, tighten them up with a screwdriver. Or he says, I've never done this before, but I think I can fix it externally. I says, what do you got in mind? He says, well, we'll take a piece of wood, say, and we'll just pound them back in. This is a true story. So I go to Mercy Hospital down in Miami, and I'm in there, and get on the operating table. He brings in the x-ray so he can see exactly where the screws are. This is a 2x2 piece of oak, about 6 inches long, and a ball-peen hammer. And pounds those screws back in. And he pounded them so hard enough that it broke the incision open from 5 weeks earlier. Oh. And I still got that block of wood.
Did he charge you for that operation?
Oh, I imagine he charged the Dolphins.
I'll tell you
what. So then I said, well, here's the deal. I can't play that anymore. So this season, so make sure you put the cast on so I can drive my pickup back to Minnesota in the off season. So he made the cast so I could, when I sat on the seat, it was at the right angle for my accelerator. And, it's just shit that we did that these guys would pass out today. I mean, they'd freaking pass out.
Shula scared me.
But did I think at any time I was being lied to that I didn't know it was dangerous? Shit, no. That's the stupidest thing I ever heard in my life.
Shula talked to Elliott and I, and he's intense to this day. If we didn't have the next question ready within 2 seconds, he goes, "What's wrong with you guys? Don't you have a question ready?"
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, there was no... He is the most intense man I've ever been around. I don't care what it was he was doing. If he was killing dandelions in the yard, he'd kill the shit out of him.
How did him and Mercury Morris get along?
They got along because Merc, despite his very high motor, talk, but Merc in his heart is a great player and was a great asset to us and a little more difficult maybe, but never at a point of being a problem. And and that was with our whole team. And I don't think we didn't have any emotional issues. The team would deal with that. If Merc started getting a little bit too cocky, we would deal with that. The coaches didn't have to, and Merc knew his place, and Zonka knew his place, and we all knew our place, and we were one part of that machine, and certainly one part wasn't bigger than the machine, and I don't think any of us ever felt that, including Mercury.
How tough was it learning to snap for field goals and punts to the point where Shula was satisfied?
Well, I had never snapped in my life for punts and field goals, and the first time, this is a true story, the first time I ever did it was I get to my first Pro Bowl. And there's nobody on the goddamn roster that knows how to snap. And I think it was Madden was my first Pro Bowl coach. He comes to me, he says, "You're going to have to snap." I said, I've never done it. Well, he says, "You're going to learn." and that was that was the great city of Kansas City. Was the first Pro Bowl I played in was in Kansas City, and I can't think of his name right now. I'm getting old. Must be CTE. Who's the kicker? Soccer-style kicker. Anyway, he's in the Hall of Fame.
Jan Stenerud?
Jan Stenerud. And Jan comes over, he says, Jim, look, he says, it's no big deal. He says, you can do this. He says, we'll work with it this week. He says, you can do it. And I'm a left-handed player. I mean, I'm left-handed, and I snap to the quarterback right-handed. So he says, you snap the ball left-handed. Don't use your right hand like you do to snap to the center. He says, just pretend you're throwing a pass, bend over, and you can do it. He said, don't think about it. Just shoot it back there. He says, they'll catch it. And he kicked 5 field goals that game. And I snapped for every one of them. I don't know how the hell it got there. Some of them might have went end over end, I suppose. And anyway, I come back to training camp, and Marty says, you snapped for the extra points and field goals. I said, yeah. He says, well, we're gonna start working on that. And I was never that good at it. I practiced. My wife would catch snaps in the backyard. I snapped to everybody. Excuse me, but there's some great snaps. Mike Webster and Jim Otto and Mick Tingelhoff were great centers and great snappers. It's an entirely separate deal. And I usually had my left hand, which was the hand I would long snap with, was usually so beat to shit that I really couldn't feel it that much. And it was kind of hard, but I could muddle through it enough, I guess. But I wouldn't consider myself a long snapper.